Today on Flashpoints, anti-UN protests rock Haiti's capital, and protests continue around the country for the fourth day running. We'll have reports from on the ground. Also, Swedish ambassador confirms cholera strain originated in Nepal. And you're listening to Flashpoints on Pacifica Radio. My name is Dennis Bernstein. Yes, the protests spread to Port-au-Prince today. The Haitian people are furious with their government, furious with the United Nations, furious with the world, knowing everybody knew there was an earthquake, 1.5 million people displaced, and now a cholera epidemic, and the West doesn't seem to care. It almost feels like an ethnic cleansing. We are joined again by our special correspondent on the ground, Ansel Herz. Ansel, where are you now?
I'm in Cap-Haïtien, which is the second largest city in Haiti. It's up on the northern coast, and this is where the protests, some call them riots, began on Monday, where you had sort of flaming barricades all over the city. The streets were blocked, and that continued into Tuesday. I got here yesterday. I came by bus, as most Haitians travel between the two major cities, Port-au-Prince and Cap-Haïtien, and the barricades were still up yesterday and had to be hustled through a whole bunch of them, but now I'm in Cap-Haïtien here.
All right, what did the day look like today? Give us, as best as you can, what happened?
Well, here in OCAP, things were fairly calm. Everybody I talked to said that, there weren't sort of out of control protests really anywhere in the city, but the barricades are still up. There's still people hanging around them. Some of them are made of tree trunks. Some are made of burned out cars, and some here in the downtown are actually made of coffins. And that's meant to be obviously very symbolic of the death toll from cholera. I just talked to actually a couple of minutes ago to a local magistrate, who said that, in his community, a certain part of OCAP here, they only have 3 doctors working at one clinic. There are people who come down from a rural area surrounding that clinic. They're kind of farther up on a mountain. And he said that there are people dying on the road every single day trying to get down to the clinic. So, amidst all the protests, I think we do have to keep in mind that people are still dying of cholera. The epidemic is still spreading and killing people day after day. This magistrate said that the only problem he has really with the protesters is that it has made it a little bit difficult to get medical supplies around the city with these barricades. But he also made a point of saying that these protests are not being sort of manipulated or created out of thin air by some kind of gang or criminal elements. And of course, Minustah, the UN peacekeeping mission here, has been claiming that these protests are, being organized by what they call enemies of stability and democracy. But everybody I've talked to here, whether it's demonstrators themselves or just people on the street, has said that that's essentially not the case. And of course, we don't know exactly, I think, how these protests began, who exactly was sort of organizing them to start with, but it certainly seems like after that they just grew and grew, and there are barricades literally all over Cap-Haïtien, even in the back streets, where yesterday I walked through and I was shown by the locals a trench, a very, very deep trench, just dug in a dirt back street. And they said that they dug that as a barricade, a kind of almost urban warfare against the UN peacekeepers. And a truck of people came through, fell into the trench, and people started throwing bottles and rocks at the soldiers. And they said that the soldiers replied with live gunfire and killed an innocent bystander. The UN, of course, is denying that, saying that he was killed in some other way by some local gang. So that's kind of the latest here in Cap-Haïtien. But in Port-au-Prince today as well, there were huge protests. I'm told an estimated, over 1,000 people, if not much more. And they started in Shanmas, the public plaza down by the National Palace, where there are still displaced earthquake victims living in tent camps. And at one point, the Haitian National Police, as well as UN, confronted these demonstrators who were, of course, chanting against the United Nations, chanting against the cholera epidemic, and fired tear gas dangerously close to these camps. And in some cases, old women sort of had to be carried out of the camps to get away from the tear gas that was swirling around them.
Now, you're in Cap Haitian, that's where the UN truck fell off the side of the road?
That's correct. It didn't fall off the road. It fell into the middle of the road, basically a road that had been, changed and altered by the local population. They dug this trench, and it was meant to, stop the Minustah from traveling around the city, and that's exactly what it did.
Now, one thinks of the UN and Minustah as traveling to proceed and help people. Maybe they're delivering medication. Maybe they're trying to treat the problem. That's not the case, and the people don't believe that?
No, I don't think there are a whole lot of people here in Cap Haitian who believe that at this point. It seems like, in general, actually today, the UN has tried to sort of stay within its own base and not be out in the streets very much. I was told by locals that, they have no problem with local Haitian police, although they did burn 2 police stations on Monday. But, yesterday I sort of came across a narrow street where there were a whole bunch of demonstrators chanting against the UN, and there were Haitian police in full riot gear lined up against them. And the demonstrators told me, we have complete respect for these Haitian police. We don't have a problem with them right now. They're our brothers, they're our family, and our only problem is with Minustah. And so, to answer your question, no, I don't think Minustah is here delivering medicine to anybody at this point. And I think if they were to try to do that, they might be sort of attacked with bottles and rocks. And I just do think it is also important to make that clear that there have been a lot of headlines of Haitians attacking UN peacekeepers, of violent protests. And I mean, I guess you can make an argument that they are violent, but we need to keep in mind these protesters don't have guns. They aren't really armed in a significant way, and there's been no documented case of them actually causing directly the death of anybody, whereas UN peacekeepers have been accused, and there is some evidence pointing to them shooting at least 3 demonstrators since Monday. And so I think a lot of the media framing of this has been misleading.
You're listening to Flashpoints on Pacifica Radio. My name is Dennis Bernstein. We're speaking with our special correspondent on the ground in the second largest city in Haiti. And again, joining us in studio is our special correspondent, Kevin Pina.
Ansel, real quickly, I just wanted to know, I know that that people have also said to me that they're angry with the United Nations because those 3 protesters that you mentioned that were shot by UN forces, the UN actually said that they didn't shoot them, that they had actually been killed by local gangs. Have you heard anything about that there in Cap Haitian?
Well, yeah, that's correct. I mean, that is what Minustah, the UN peacekeepers, are saying. And from everybody I've talked to, whether that's Haitian journalists, people in the neighborhoods, they've all said that it was Minustah, in fact, that fired ammunition and caused gunshot wounds to people that were fatal in some cases, and then there are others who were reportedly wounded and had to be taken to the hospital. I was a little bit sick earlier today, so I haven't had a chance to go to the hospital myself yet, but that's what I'm told by a whole number of different folks that I've talked to here in Cap Haitian. And I've tried to put that question very specifically to people of whether gangs are involved in any of this, whether politicians and sort of behind-the-scenes manipulators are behind a lot of these protests or riots, whatever you want to call them. And not a single person here in Cap Haitian has told me that they believe that they are, except one foreigner who seems to believe that this is the work of the Unité Party. And I think there are doubts around that because one of the common chants of these protesters has also been against the current ruling government, which is, of course, the party of Unité.
What can you say in terms of where you are, the direct situation around cholera? Are there more treatment centers now? Is there any indication of an expanding attempt by the government to treat people?
Doctors Without Borders, I know, just opened up a new cholera treatment center here in Ocap. They're using a stadium to sort of treat patients. Besides that, here in Ocap, where the epidemic has really, I think, gone out of control. I mentioned earlier that this magistrate was talking about people just dying in the road. I don't know that the response has really been upgraded in a massive way to deal with the scope of the epidemic. I certainly have not heard of any other cholera treatment centers built here. As I think I mentioned on the program last time, I've talked to Medicine Sans Frontières staffers who continue to say that they feel rather lonely in their response to cholera. They don't feel like other actors, and that's kind of the NGO word for other organizations. They don't feel like other actors are stepping up in this fight against cholera. So I don't think that is the case, although it's interesting to note, I heard that on the radio, several ministers, high-level ministers from the government, came to Cap-Haïtien here to sort of somehow deal with these protests. Also, the chief of police was here reportedly. I myself saw the Minister of Interior earlier today at Hotel Christoph, and he refused to speak to me. And so certainly the government is active. They're sending their people around it to deal with problems, I guess, but I don't know how effective they've been at dealing with cholera because the casualties continue to rise.
Listening to Flashpoints on Pacifica Radio, we continue our drumbeat coverage of the situation in Haiti, which is desperate. There are now protests, angry protests around the country. They have spread to Port-au-Prince. You mentioned earlier, I know that you're on the other side of the country, but you're following the situation very closely. You said a protest, perhaps 1,000 more. What exactly are people protesting for, or are they just sort of desperate? It's sort of like put your finger over the steam in the teapot and it explodes.
I think that people have very clear political, objectives and political ideas that they want to get out with these protests. I spoke to a protester yesterday who was very clear. He was saying Minustah soldiers are like tourists. They have a huge budget. These soldiers are paid to be here, and yet we have an extremely poor country. And all the money that's invested in Minustah, he said, could be used to invest in health and education, the building of hospitals, and that's a common sentiment that I've heard in Haiti for months now. And in downtown Port-au-Prince today, I know there were signs that said Minustah Kaka na Rivière, which is Creole for basically the human waste of Minustah soldiers is in the river. And of course, that news that a Minustah base in central Haiti was caught ejecting its waste into the river, that news has traveled widely, and it kind of falls in tandem with other rumors that have circulated in Haiti for years that Minustah, steals goats. That was another thing that I heard yesterday, that Minustah just in general, they don't respect Haiti sort of as an environment or as a people necessarily. And so, people have said time and time again, the country would be better off if we didn't have Minustah in the country right now. They're not accountable to us. They spend all this money on military type, actions as opposed to humanitarian activity. And so now they've introduced cholera into the country where we never had cholera before. And so it's time for them to leave. I think it's a very specific thing that people are asking for. And hopefully, there will be some listening to that and not just a continual dismissal of it by the authorities.
All right, let's talk a little bit about the camps. We're talking about 1.3 million, 1.5 million people still in the camps from the earthquakes. We've seen some serious rain, almost hit by a hurricane. Certainly the parts of that storm did affect in a very dramatic way some parts of Port-au-Prince and other parts of the country. What is happening in the camps, and how does that tie into all the other protests and the cholera?
I think the camps, the situation of the camps just feeds into the extreme political discontent that's sort of spreading in the country right now. I mean, the fact that you have 1.3 million people still living in those conditions, the fact that the government rarely sort of speaks directly to their plight and gives them an idea of what they can expect in the months going forward. It's almost like they are planning for these people to just be stuck there permanently. And so, for many months now, actually, a certain group of residents of these camps in Port-au-Prince have been holding protests. They've been in front of the Prime Minister's office. They've been in Chanmas. They've been in several sort of places in Port-au-Prince. We're holding up signs, chanting, and they've been fairly small demonstrations, but they've included sort of different leaders and committees from camp all around Port-au-Prince, whether that's Carrefour or Cité Soleil or Delma. And their general cry has been, we're not going to vote, we're not going to participate in this election while we're under tents and under tarps. And so and of course, also they've been expressing discontent with Minustah as well. And I think all of this is just leading up to a sort of crisis situation where supposedly somehow the authorities are going to hold an election on November 28th where we still have voter rolls that have deceased from the earthquake on them. You have many people who lost their identity cards in the earthquake who have not been able to get them back. I just really wonder what's going to happen with this election on November 28th, if it's even going to be pulled off. And if they do pull it off somehow, is it really going to be free and fair? Are there going to be enough observers? What is the participation level going to be when you have 1.3 million people living in these tent camps? To date, there's almost nothing visible on the ground that indicates that adequate preparations are being made. The one thing that you do see are these ubiquitous billboards for Jude Celestin, the candidate of the ruling party, Preval's handpicked successor. And not only that, I'll mention too, I don't think enough attention has been paid to this. CARICOM recently issued a statement, the Community of Caribbean States, expressing some concern over whether state funds have been used inappropriately to fund certain campaigns. And so it was a very vague sort of generic statement, but what that would indicate is that there are worries that the Haitian government itself has paid for this massive advertising blitz by the ruling party's candidates. And the reality on the ground when you see the number of posters here would indicate that maybe that's a possibility. And that, I think, is also extremely enraging to Haitians if they see that and observe that, that money is being spent on a political campaign that could be used to help improve their lives.
All right, Ansel Hurst on the ground in Haiti. Very fine reporting, Ansel. Important work you're doing. We appreciate the risk and the fact that you do this for us here on Flashpoints as a volunteer. Please be careful, take care of yourself, and thanks for all the great work you're doing for us and other outlets on Pacifica, Democracy Now!, wherever it is. It's much appreciated. Please take care.
Thanks, Dennis.
And you are listening to Flashpoints on Pacifica Radio. We're going to continue talking about the subject with our special correspondent, Kevin Pina. Kevin, you heard Ansel. You spent many years on the ground. You know what every angle of this story looks like. First of all, let's pick it up with the cholera. You have new information from the Swedish ambassador. Let's talk about that.
Well, I spent 5 hours.
This is a big story.
I spent 5 hours, starting at 2 o'clock in the morning till about 7 o'clock this morning. A series of 7 phone calls to the Swedish ambassador to the Caribbean, Klaus, what the heck is his last name? Excuse me, Klaus Hammar. Is his last name, Hammar. And the reason I was calling him is because he was quoted in the largest Swedish daily. as having said that he had received conclusive proof that the cholera strain that is indeed rampaging through Haiti originated with Nepalese soldiers. He was then pressed to identify his sources by the largest Helsinki daily in Finland, and he responded, it was a U.S. diplomat who gave me the information and the report, and he tested at the Nepalese facility, and that's why I'm 100% sure, he said. It's 100% true that the cholera strain began with Nepalese troops in Haiti. So, of course, I had to run after that story. I dug up his phone number at the Swedish consul in Stockholm, the Swedish government inside of Stockholm, and I spoke with him, maybe a total of a half an hour over a period.
With the ambassador?
With the ambassador directly, trying to get him to go on the record to give me a statement. He basically said to me, look, I can't give you a radio interview now. I'm talking only to the Scandinavian press. This thing is already blown out of proportion. I'm afraid that UN troops are going to get hurt, to which I, of course, replied to him, well, I'm sorry, do you know what's going on the ground in Haiti? It's not UN troops that are getting shot and killed in Haiti. It's the protesters. And, of course, that sort of changed the timbre of the conversation. But basically, at about 5:30 in the morning, he said to me, listen, I just had a visitor from the U.S. Embassy come into my office. Call me back. Well, I called him back, and, of course, after that, it was like his entire tone changed, and I'm sorry, I absolutely cannot give you an interview at this time. And it was pretty clear that it was connected to the U.S. Embassy showing up in his office, and I think also he had taken my name down, he'd taken down the name of this show, and I think that once they put two and two together, there was no way in heck that they were going to let this guy give us a statement on the air. But what he did say, which, of course, I couldn't record without his permission, but I can report. What he did say was that he stands behind his statements, that I had asked. I spoke to this press officer who he referred me to at one point, because he said, I don't think I can make a statement. I called Kent Obert, who's the press officer for the Swedish government, the entire Swedish government. I said, I'm sorry, I was referred to you because the ambassador said he understands that he's under some restrictions to speak. And Kent Oberg said, well, not that I know of. He's open to talk to you. And I said, but the one thing I did get from the representative of the Swedish government, their press liaison, I asked him, do you consider Ambassador Hammer a credible man? To which he replied, oh, absolutely. No question. His credentials are impeccable.
Listening to Flashpoints on Pacifica Radio, we're doing our continuing drumbeat reporting on the tragic situation in Haiti that started with the earthquake, started long before the earthquake, but the earthquake was the first disaster. There was a storm, and now there is a spreading cholera epidemic, and there are many angry people on the ground in Haiti. We're speaking with Kevin Pina.
Well, also the World Health Organization today. Well, let me take one step back. You remember, I think I said to our listeners earlier in the week that Dr. Paul Farmer was putting pressure on the Center for Disease Control to release their report about the origin of the cholera strain. Well, guess what? Today they did. A day after this Swedish ambassador gave these interviews to the Scandinavian press. Well, also today the World Health Organization is saying that it's not important where the origin of the strain is. And, of course, my response to the World Health Organization is, well, if it's not important, then why did the UN expend such tremendous public relations effort over the last 2 days denying it?
Well, if it's not important, well, that's bizarre, because obviously it's crucial to know where, if it's coming from outside the country, you want to stem the tide of the disease. You want to stop the people who may have brought it in from coming in. So, of course, it's very important.
Well, and also you've got to remember that what this exposes again is the United Nations' willingness to invest in cover-ups. And it's not the first time. We know that. The United Nations stands accused of one of the greatest cover-ups, human rights cover-ups in the history of Latin America and the Caribbean from between 2004 to 2006, which, our listeners know that story well, including accusations of committing massacres directly on residents of the seaside shanty town of Cité Soleil. And, of course...
these are massacres that you confirmed on foot.
Absolutely. And we We have depositions. We have the footage. This is confirmed. And the United Nations and the U.S. Embassy know this. But the interesting thing to note is after the massacre in Cité Soleil, particularly July the 6th, 2005, what did the UN say when the footage was showed to them and the evidence was shown to them that people actually did die from headshots of high-powered rifles? You know what they said? They said gangs shot them. Does it sound familiar? They said that local gangs killed those people as a reprisal because they supported their invasion of the community. That's what they said. And it's no accident that Edmund Moulet, who is the United Nations chief of mission there, was also there during that same period. This is his M.O. That's why I'm not surprised to hear that when UN troops shoot and kill 3 demonstrators in Cap-Haïtien, that the United Nations response is to cover it up by saying that local gangs were responsible, because that is exactly United Nations chief of mission Edmund Moulet's modus operandi. He's done it before, and this man is shown that he's willing to see the streets run red before he is willing to admit that the United Nations has ever made a mistake in that country, and that the United Nations must be held to a higher standard of accountability. And that's what's really at issue here. And that's why I think, listen, people are calling in Haiti for the United Nations to withdraw. I don't think that's realistic at this point. But you know what is realistic? Is we should be calling for the resignation of the chief of mission, Edmund Moulet, for trying to cover up this cholera epidemic, creating more controversy and more rumors in the streets of Port-au-Prince as a result, which have now resulted in UN troops firing on unarmed protesters. He should resign, and the Nepalese contingent of the United Nations should be sent home as a goodwill gesture on the part of the United Nations to say, yes, we hold ourselves accountable and to the same so-called standards of democracy that we claim we're trying to represent in rebuilding Haiti.
You're listening to Flashpoints on Pacifica Radio. That's Kevin Pina. I'm Dennis Bernstein. Coming up later on in this broadcast, we're going to take a look at the pro-democracy movement in Burma. There's a new film that documents the battle to release some 2,000 prisoners. Aung San Suu Kyi has been let out for the time being, but 2,000 pro-democracy activists in Burma are continuing to suffer in what I have to call dungeons. I did extensive research on that story, and I tell you that there is a AIDS pandemic that grows out of the kind of medical care, the failure to protect people in many ways. So we'll be talking about that in one moment. We urge you to stay tuned. Looking forward to talking about that subject. But this is crucial, Kevin. I have 2 more questions for you. First of all, let's talk a little bit more about the elections. How could it be that they would go forward, although they do still seem hell-bent on pushing forward, and as you said, or it was Ansel, some $15 million coming in to Haiti from the U.S., not for cholera, not for helping people who are in camps, but for electioneering.
Well, it's actually 29, almost $30 million. And it looks like that number is going to go up because this campaign is getting expensive, campaigning in the time of cholera in Haiti. You know, everybody knows this is absolutely absurd. First of all, these were demonstration elections, which were not inclusive. As Ansel had mentioned, Senator Lugar, the head of the Foreign Relations Committee of the Senate, they released a report condemning the elections because Preval's hand-picked election council, Conseil Electoral Provisoire, had eliminated more than 12 parties, including, I think it's 14 parties, including Famille Labalas, the largest majority political party, most popular party in the country. We know that Maxine Waters has circulated a petition among the Congress, more than 40 co-signers at this point, a bill to defund the elections because of their exclusive nature and not being perceived as free and democratic. And really what's at stake here is how can Haiti improve, and how can it be governed by someone who comes out of an election process, is selected in an election process that does not really have the support of the majority of the people, does not really have a mandate of the Haitian people to rule. And that's exactly what we're looking at coming out of this process. So rather than being a process that's going to resolve Haiti's problems, which I know a lot of non-governmental organizations and a lot of well-intentioned people who have hope want to project that in these elections. But the truth is, I don't see that coming out of this. There's no way. How can you have 1.3 million people homeless? How can you have cholera? I mean, what's the Organization of American States going to do? They're the real mouthpiece of the Secretary of State Hillary Rodham Clinton and the Obama administration for these elections. Well, what is the Organization of American States going to do? They're going to have a bucket and toilet paper at every polling station? They're going to have a nurse at every polling station? I mean, that's what this is.
People carrying other people into...
of course, that's what this is coming down to at this point.
I mean, you could have elections spreading cholera.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And people will most likely be afraid to go to the polls for that reason. It's absolutely ludicrous. It's absolutely ridiculous. Everybody knows it. But they have so much invested. And this includes, again, Edmund Millet, representing the United Nations, and Ban Ki-moon, who really in many ways, and I'll say it again, I know a lot of people don't agree, but I think that I can make a very solid argument